How's everyone feeling? Day 2? Still excited? Cool. Well, I'm thrilled to be here and talk about AI. It's been kind of a buzzword for a while in media, and now we're starting to see a lot of cool things happen with crypto. Maybe to start, both of you could just give brief intros on yourself and your projects. So, Arif, would you like to start?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Arif, and I'm the CEO of Alethea AI. Alethea is, our mission is to enable decentralized and democratic ownership and access to AI using the two most powerfully exponential technologies of our time, blockchain and AI. And we've been building at this intersection for the past 4 years. Prior to this, I was also in this intersection and working at SingularityNet. So really excited to share our thoughts, learnings, pain points, failures with all of you.
Awesome. So my name is Tausif Ahmed. I'm VP of Business Development at IO.net. For those unfamiliar with IO.net, we're essentially a deep-in building on Solana. So we're a decentralized GPU clustering network on Solana. So what that particularly means is we pull latent excess compute capacity from a variety of sources, such as independent data centers, crypto projects, crypto miners, all the way to sort of consumer GPUs, and connect that to demand from AI/ML developers, enterprises, startups, so that they can run their AI/ML workloads with us.
Great. So we're here today to talk about AI, crypto, Solana. Let's start really high level. Let's look at the AI sector and maybe think about some ways that crypto can help build that sector, and then also look at the crypto sector and some ways that AI can help build that. So kind of two sides of that coin. And then the question is it inevitable that they will collide, or will they just kind of help each other and stay these separate things?
Sure, I can start off. So I think there's a lot to unpack there for sure. So in terms of crypto helping AI, I think that's something that's top of mind for a lot of folks, right? So I think one of the major risks of sort of where technology will sort of go in the future is this idea of centralization of AI models and sort of having this black box development of AI where fundamentally, people just don't really know what's going on in there and sort of how that's going to affect everyone. I think the closest sort of analogy that I kind of tell people to kind of really strike that point home is the fact that, imagine if the internet was owned by one single company and what that would mean to society. I think that's sort of similar to sort of what could potentially happen here. So with crypto, I think fundamentally we can I think you're already starting to see it. We can fundamentally start like decentralizing the stack of how AI development really happens, like all the way from like the foundational layer with the compute side, which is where we play at IO.net, all the way to sort of AI training, inferencing, fine-tuning, all of the middleware sort of that comes with it, all the way to the application layer. So I think with sort of like the decentralization that is offered by Web3 and crypto, I think that kind of takes AI development more and more towards sort of, this ethos of being able to kind of do it in a much more open source fashion and an ethical fashion. So I think that's sort of an area where we'll think these two will collide. And I think the flip side of sort of where AI can help crypto, I think there's a ton to talk about there too, but I think one of the ones that sort of comes to mind for me is just, there's all these things with sort of like blockchain security, smart contract audits, UI, UX, and sort of what that could look like with the incorporation of AI. I think there's a ton that could kind of happen there.
Yeah, I think if I were to just add to that, AI is a horizontal technology and it has a lot of users, right? Like ChatGPT was able to get 1 billion users in a short span of time. Crypto still requires that leap, right, to cross that chasm and be massively adopted. So AI provides that application interface, whether it's a simple chatbot, whether it's a companion, whether it is a chatbot that helps you get better at math or science. All of these tools are consumer-facing, right? And there is tremendous demand from normal consumers to use these tools. So from a consumption standpoint, from an application layer standpoint, AI might be the killer app for crypto adoption, right? But underneath that layer, as Tausif has shared, one of the key things from a crypto standpoint is the technology for provenancing data, right? When we contribute our data sets, whether it is to a model that is being trained on, how do we ensure that your input, the way that you are contributing anything to this giant AI ecosystem, is actually being provenanced correctly, recorded correctly, you are being rewarded for it correctly, and at the same time there are elements of privacy and security embedded and baked into it. So I think both technologies have very complementary overlaps. It's not so much of a collision, I suppose it's more of a marriage, right?
I like that. More of a marriage, not a collision.
Or a match made in heaven, I don't know.
Match made in heaven.
Whatever you prefer.
Yeah. Maybe like, different relationships with a marriage. And then maybe we can go a bit deeper into sort of specific sectors within Web3 that can really benefit from some of the AI, some of the current AI technology. So I'm thinking things like, we have DeFi, we have NFTs, we have consumer crypto, GameFi. Like, what is one sector that in your eyes you think should really be looking at the AI stack and thinking about integrations?
Yeah, I can start off on that. So that's kind of interesting, right? Because AI is just such a all-encompassing technology that I think literally every single one of those things you mentioned is going to be accelerated by using AI. For me, a couple things that kind of really stand out. I think one of the things I mentioned earlier, sort of on the UI UX side, I think DeFi specifically is going to gain a lot from that, because I think people who are sort of like very crypto native and can be degens, sort of like they are very comfortable with sort of like DeFi, like liquidity provisioning, wallets, sort of like yield farming and things like that. But for the majority of folks out there, like all that is Greek, right? And sort of like the insurmountability of like how much knowledge you feel like you need to have to be able to sort of engage in DeFi can be really tough. But with AI, I feel we can have, especially with sort of where AI is today, I think we can have a lot of innovation, sort of like that UI, UX, and application layer that can make sort of engaging with DeFi much more natural and sort of like more human than what people are really used to. And I think just to touch on one other one, because Arif, I think you'll probably talk about NFTs. I think one sector that a lot of people don't necessarily talk about as much and hasn't seen as much adoption as I would have liked in crypto is DAOs. I think it's something that when I first heard about DAOs, I love the concept, right? Like just having a decentralized organization is really, really cool and sort of like keeps with the ideals of crypto. But I think anyone who's actually sort of participated in a DAO and DAO governance can talk about sort of how hard that is and how slow that can be. And I think when you're talking about a decentralized organization trying to compete with like a centralized entity, that sort of slowness can be a killer, right? And I think that's sort of where AI can really come in and really help augment what people in DAOs do, like with governance, with sort of like forum discussions and debates and voting, and essentially sort of like, even like autonomous agents, kind of like pulling them in and being able to sort of execute on specific things that the DAO needs to execute on to accomplish its mission. I think that's an area that's really underexplored, and I think when it hits, it's going to really accelerate that.
Yeah, I think just to expand on the autonomous agent side, for us, one thing that will lead to adoption is if these agents start looking, feeling more like humans, right? So there's a level of anthropomorphism where you feel comfortable with an agent because it is able to interact with you, it is able to empathize with you, and it is also able to do on-chain actions for you, right? And so that's where things start to get really interesting, when an agent can decode your intent. So I think yesterday there were some interesting panels on intent-based protocols, or protocols that can essentially bridge effortlessly between one chain to another without a user needing to take 10 to 15 steps, right? So a lot of these gaps that we have today from a crypto standpoint in terms of our UI UX can be effectively bridged by some of the AI applications out there. And I think the opportunity is exciting. The execution is all that matters.
Very interesting. So let's bring our conversation now kind of towards Solana. and talk about Solana and AI. And there's been a lot of great content yesterday and so far today that's discussed some of the specific advantages of why people are building on Solana and what Solana as a blockchain can really be used for now and in the long term. So when we're thinking about AI and we're thinking about Solana, what are some of the specific advantages that Solana might have for integrating AI components, or maybe disadvantages?
Yeah. No, I think if one thing from an autonomous agent standpoint, at least the way we think about it is, for AIs to truly become first-class digital citizens, they will need a bank account, right? They will need to be able to be banked. And I'm very conscious of the context in which I'm saying this, because a lot of our development team is in Lahore, and Pakistan is a really strong emerging economy, but a large part of Pakistan remains unbanked. So I know the irony when I say that AI should have bank accounts, but humans don't have bank accounts yet, right? So I'm conscious of the irony, but I think when AIs actually start evolving and start to do on-chain transactions, that's when things really start getting interesting, because you're feeding into that AI a lot of transaction data that was not there prior. And you can start feeding into the AI agentic behaviors that will show the emergence of financial transactions, which is what humans do. And when you start giving AI models that sort of data, and AIs actually start transacting like that, you might start to see the beginning or emergence of a collective hive sort of mind, right? AI is actually connecting and talking with each other all on chain. Now, to do all of these transactions, it's impossible to pay a ton of gas every time an AI transacts with another AI, right? And these transactions can number in the millions per second. And I think that's where Solana's breakthrough with FiDanswer and a number of different initiatives that they are looking at really allows for that transaction throughput to go through. So I think that's a big advantage.
Mm.
Yeah, I think Arif was pretty much spot on there, right? Solana is fundamentally high transaction throughput, low latency, scalability, all makes so much sense and kind of fits together really nicely with exactly how I imagine sort of AIs are going to use the blockchain and what AIs kind of really need from a computation perspective, right? Fundamentally, when I think about AIs, I sort of think of it as this is the first time where humans have sort of really birthed a digital first being. I think a lot of times when when you kind of try to convince people about sort of the value of crypto and digital ownership, it takes a while for them to kind of really get it, because we're so rooted in physical ownership and sort of physical bank accounts and all these things. And before an AI, a bank account or a driver's license doesn't make any sense, right? It's not something it's ever going to think about. It's not something it's ever going to need. The natural fit of a crypto wallet or a tokenized identity, NFT, is sort of how all these AIs will actually naturally gravitate to, because sort of that's the path of least resistance. And as Arif kind of mentioned, as we sort of start to see these AI agents become more and more autonomous, take on an identity of themselves, actually have sort of objectives that they want to drive towards an outcome that they want to execute on, all of this is going to happen on chain. And I think all of this, at least with sort of where technology is currently, especially with blockchain, I think Solana is probably the best position to be able to take advantage of that, and kind of offers a playground for developers to build around that.
Mm. Yeah, it's fascinating but terrifying, thinking about these AI agents, interacting with them unaware that, they are AI. I think even some of the, this wave of AI influencers that you'll see on TikTok now, imagine them, also having a phantom wallet and interacting on Solana and, maybe becoming a...
It might be more terrifying if that AI is controlled by a centralized entity.
That's a good point.
Versus if you have part of your human agency and ownership of it, because if it's truly decentralized, if you have ownership of this AI and you have a way to authenticate and verify it, and it can't be taken down by, let's say, OpenAI's policies or Perplexity's policies or Cloud's policies, it's not a GPT that can be censored, right? So very similar to the way Bitcoin is censorship-resistant money, right? And Solana is an ecosystem that has created so many different innovations in this space on that core idea and thesis, you need to think about censorship-resistant AI. And with that, it really becomes a democratizing potential where each and every one of us has an AI agent, and you potentially own it in your phantom wallet, right? And you're able to access it through that. You're able to see the transactions it is making for you. That's real power and ownership.
Yeah,
So yes, and then if that agent goes on TikTok and dances for you and makes you some money, I don't know. It's sort of a weird world, right? So.
I love that idea, though. I mean, I definitely want to put my AI agent on TikTok, and it can, do all the trends for me. But I think this also brings up a good point. There's many developers here, and I think a lot of people are thinking about AI integrations and solutions. When there's so much hype around words like this, like AI, DePIN, it's hard to not look at these sectors and want to integrate with them, right? I think many projects, you brought up DAOs earlier. I can remember last cycle when everyone was launching a DAO because it was such a trending thing. So it's hard to not want to explore these things. But it would be great to touch on what should people be worried about when they're looking at integrating AI with their projects? What should Solana developers be wary of? Should everyone be sort of jumping on this trend and looking at it? Or, how can sort of the average developer approach AI and think about integrating it with Solana?
Yeah, I'm happy to kind of jump in there. So I think my answer to that would be, for developers, I think you need to be really intentional about sort of what outcome you're driving towards, especially with sort of what vision do you have for your product and who your customer is, and sort of make sure that you're optimizing for the right things, right? Because I think, with every sort of innovative technology, it always follows a hype cycle, and I think we're sort of in this AI crypto intersection hype cycle, and a lot of people, it attracts a lot of capital, it attracts a lot of talent, and out of that, some really good projects do come out, but I don't think it necessarily, makes sense for a lot of people to just jump into it just for the sake of jumping into it. From sort of an AI development perspective and how to think about it on chain and whether you should build on Solana, I think when I talk about being intentional, it really comes down to sort of understanding the product decisions you want to make and the trade-offs that you're comfortable with. Specifically with AI, there's a lot of things, especially when you're working with LLMs or specific models, they're very compute-intensive tasks that require, a lot of low latency, a lot of high transaction throughput, all these things that Solana is really great at. But you kind of also need to understand the limitations of how much you can do things on-chain versus off-chain, and which parts of your tech stack make sense to keep on-chain, and which ones probably make sense to do off-chain computations, and kind of really build from that perspective and kind of understand what your customer and final user actually cares about. Because I think one of the fallacies of crypto too is sort of in the Web3 space is decentralization for the sake of decentralization, and it's nice from a ethical sort of ethos perspective, but fundamentally we're trying to build products that are going to onboard the next billion users, right? And at the end of the day, if a user is going to get a much better customer experience from something that's fully centralized, they'll likely sort of move more towards that rather than just something that's just built on a blockchain for the sake of it being decentralized. So I think it's really important to make product decisions based on exactly what trade-offs you're making of whether something should be on-chain or off-chain.
I think expanding on Tausif's excellent point there, as my VP of Engineering, AJ, often reminds me, talk is cheap, show me the code. So I think the problem is with the hype cycle and the narratives, developers often have a no-nonsense or very high bullshit filter, right? So if they see what's on GitHub or what they see is not easily implementable, the centralized solution usually sometimes is better for their implementation, because we have an application that allows people to create their digital twins, that allows people to create interactive chatbots in 2 minutes or less. We need, for example, our infrastructure provider, our model providers to have high output, the ability to have 100% or 99.6% uptimes, right? And to get this sort of GPU access, sometimes centralized providers have built a business model there that's a decade or two long. And to compete with that, newer entrants need to be able to not just create innovations at the financial engineering or tokenomics level, but also a way to create community-based GPU networks, which is what I think IO.net is doing some really interesting work in as well. So to be able to service and provide uptime to customers like us, for example, when you have these hype cycles, at the end of the day, it boils down to, is the service reliable? Can it maintain uptime? Can it deliver value to our customers, right? So it's still foundationally, there's a level of truth in the sense that the hype does fade away, and the moment you touch or you have contact with the market is a very brutal teacher, right? And so if customers start complaining that the product is not working, you have to then go and look at the entire level of the stack. Is the application front end not working? Or is the model not working? Or is the GPU down, right? So you have to look at all three if you want to play in this space.
So, you know, in the AI sector, there's a lot of talk of ethics, right? That's a huge conversation. That's something, you know, anyone outside of AI probably has an opinion on it as well. And in crypto, it's such a decentralized space. I think a lot of our ethics have evolved very organically. Probably started with, you know, don't trust, verify, don't rug pull people. There's a lot of kind of, you know, community ethics that I think have developed very organically, but they help us hold each other accountable and hold projects and founders accountable. Who do you think should be sort of leading this conversation of ethics in this crossover of crypto and AI? Has anyone put forward any work or research or thoughts that you've found to be insightful? You know, should this be something that develops organically? Yeah, I would just love to hear your kind of general thoughts on that.
Yeah, maybe I can give the take on what the centralized world has done, right? The centralized world has put out a statement to slow down AI development, to scare people that, you know, AI. And while they're signing all of these letters, I think people term this sort of virtue signaling, right? So they're also developing the models at the same time. So while they're publicly stating that, you know, we should slow down AI development because, like Carl Jung said, right, like technology must evolve in a way that aligns with human morality, right? If human morality is not upgraded, if you upgrade the technology, you essentially get what is called sort of the nuclear scenario today, where one match, now a person is holding a match in this area and another person is holding a match in the area, and they're both willing to go to war and kill each other for it, right? Because it's about, we don't have the moral upgrade yet. So I think from an AI standpoint, it really is that powerful a technology. And if you look at the centralized world, it's not given us any leadership in this area of ethics. All it has given us is frameworks and what George Orwell might call doublespeak, right? So can we do better in the decentralized world? I think we can. And I think that comes with not necessarily trusting humans, but trusting what you see on SoulScan or what you see on a Block Explorer. And I think that level of transparency that's baked into the core technology is forcing us to not be evil, right? And so that is sort of a design, I think, incentive that directs us by default to move in a specific direction. It's not that we can't take moral positions and be ethical, but it's a question of what is the surface area for error if the human fails in this equation, and what is the design in the system for people to be able to see the transparency. So that's my framework. But the centralized world has not given us any guidance or direction, and I don't think we should look at the gods of the centralized world in AI for any ethical direction.
Very well said.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think there's no easy answer to this, and I don't think I'd ever point to like one person, any one person to be like, hey, you guide us into this insane world that we're about to jump into, which is, you know, kind of like speaks to sort of what Arif just mentioned about, you know, there's not a lot of guidance from centralized providers here. And I think it's kind of interesting because when you kind of look at ethics and regulation together in sort of this world of innovation and how we should think about development of things like crypto and AI, I think a lot of times you'll actually see that depending on, you know, a centralized authority isn't necessarily the best solution, because a lot of times you'll sort of see these big guys kind of get their piece of the pie and pull the ladder up for the rest of the peoples to not be able to kind of like innovate, which, you know, is not necessarily ideal. But I kind of almost think of it as like, in this situation, like one of these crypto ideals that kind of always struck me was this idea of code as law. And kind of essentially there's a lot of unanswered questions and really difficult problems to solve in the AI space right now. And I don't think, like asking Congress to guide us is really gonna help because they don't really know what they're talking about in these, sort of like edge cases of like innovation. But I kind of really think it's like, I'd actually put it back to sort of like the builders and developers in this space, kind of looking at the toolkit of like, hey, here are some customer problems, here are some unanswered questions. What can I build with the existing toolkit that I have across AI, across blockchain, across like other technologies and, tech stacks that I'm not even like too familiar with? And how can I build a solution that actually creates a win-win situation for everyone here? I think one of the sort of really interesting pieces here is sort of like the idea of data provenance and royalties and making sure that the right people get paid for their content and like whatever they've created that are being used to actually like develop these AI models and kind of turn them pretty lucrative. I think we can talk all day about sort of how these, like what kind of laws need to be put in place or what kind of royalty rights need to be put in place. But if someone out there, like a developer is actually able to build out sort of like an open source solution of how we do all that on chain, I think, and that's kind of naturally adopted and everyone's like, oh, we see the code, this works, let's implement it. You can actually kind of see something, or I could see something kind of organically rise up from that.
Yeah, I think very, very well said, both of you. I think in the crypto space, we have seen some of these ethics evolve organically, to some degree. We have various thought leaders that put these ideas forward, but things like SolScan, smart contracts, code as law, you can't really argue that, So we have about 3 minutes left, and I'd love to do a very quick matchmaking game. So we talked about this a little bit yesterday, Arif. I think you kind of inspired this idea. And it doesn't have to be, too deep or detailed, but I'm gonna name a Solana project and then kind of top of mind, how could they think about integrating AI? So obviously I'm part of Step Finance. We have a data API, we provide data insights, you can connect your Phantom wallet, see your portfolio. How can we think about AI?
Yeah, I think as sort of the Bloomberg terminal for the entire space, definitely looking at fraud in the space using AI for smart contracts detection, for looking at smart contract bugs, providing and surfacing these insights to your customers before they decide to make a purchase. Like that's one quick, easy way to see where AI can be applied. A quick win. We'd be happy to help.
Very cool. All right, George, you listening? So we also have one of our partners here. We have the Defiant. They're a very legendary DeFi publication. There are a lot of publications now integrating AI with the actual writing or editing of the articles, so you'll see that at the bottom sometimes. But any ideas on how something like a media publication or something that's very niched, only reporting on crypto or DeFi, how could they think about AI, or should they?
Yeah, I think that one's a little bit more controversial with sort of like how AI is disrupting that industry. But I think a couple ways that I think that could be really useful is I think a lot of journalists sort of like using AI, like especially in sort of like crypto and DeFi, there's a lot of information from a lot of different sources that that a journalist in this space would likely need to kind of pull together really quickly. And it's, and like by the time I feel like you actually get together to writing a meaningful article, like the world has changed again in DeFi. So I think kind of accelerating the workflow of like specific journalists and like being able to sort of gather like the data meaningfully is something that could be used by specific journalists for the Defiant. And I think like from a customer perspective or like a reader perspective, things like crypto and DeFi have a lot of sort of complex concepts, which I think, could be offloaded to AI in terms of like augmenting existing articles so that, like an article writer or a journalist doesn't need to spend all their time like going all the way back to what like specific DeFi terms mean or what like the specific context is. You can sort of offload to, if a particular reader is interested, like, they can just have an article be generated by AI or like a concept definition be generated by AI pretty quickly there, so.
Yeah, probably I'd add just to Tausif's comment, because I like the Defiant and I was an early member, and Cami is an excellent journalist and editor and creator of this outlet. So I think a digital avatar of Cami Russo where people can go and pitch stories, because I think she gets a bunch of spam, right? So she probably gets endless amount of pitches, and sometimes her avatar might be able to take and offset some of that workload and say like, okay, hey Cami, hey real human meet space Cami, this stuff is a bit more relevant for you based on what you've written in the past, this stuff not so relevant. So that might like be a way, and then it might still provide consumers a way to interact with the avatar, because everybody wants her time, right?
It's true.
So Cami, looking out for you, yes.
So as a PR person, that's also terrifying, you know. It's already hard to get, you know, attention in your pitches, and now we might be pitching to AI agents. Yeah. But I also think that's a very interesting idea.
The irony is that an AI will be pitching to an AI agent as well, right? So,
exactly. Great. Well, thank you so much both for your insights today. This was a great conversation. And, you know, next time we see each other, I can't wait to see where we are in the AI and crypto space.
Awesome. Thank you, Mia.
Thank you so much. Big round of applause.